In our thinking at UNCTAD, adhering to the sustainability principles in freight transport will help the sector to achieve efficiency, high quality of services, social inclusiveness, and economic progress, while at the same time reducing the negative externalities of the transport sector in terms of environmental degradation and climate change. Therefore, there remains a need to further define the concept of sustainable freight transport and identify the requirements that should be met in order for freight transport to be indeed sustainable. In this context, a well-defined and articulated common international framework for sustainable freight transport that would be widely accepted and adhered to would, in our view, be of great value, as it will help streamline the thinking and provide coherence in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and also the Paris Climate Agreement. From UNCTAD's perspective, the long-term vision for sustainable freight transport, as well as a coordinated and a collaborative approach to the implementation of sustainability principles in freight transport is critical. The cooperation and partnerships should encompass all players: government, the freight transport industry, and the trade community, specialized organizations, human agencies, as well as academia and financial and lending partners. So in this respect, UNCTAD, with its broad mandate in trade and development and long-standing expertise in transport and trade logistics, has a critical role to play in leading this work to help advance the sustainable development agenda.
We see ourselves being responsible in ensuring that we have a seamless transport system in terms of freight. And how do you achieve a seamless freight transport system? I think you achieve it by making sure that you have all the elements of transport, of freight transport, integrated together. To do so, for us here in this country, we've done so by making sure that we develop our transport system based on corridors, as opposed to having disjointed elements of transport. And we have two key corridors in this country. We have what we call Mombasa to Uganda, to Kigali, to Southern Sudan corridor, which we call the Northern Corridor. Then we have what we call the LAPSET, which is Lamu, Port, Southern Sudan, Ethiopia corridor. Now, if you look at those corridors, you see for yourself that it integrates a lot of freight transport. Number one, we have the maritime, the ships coming to Mombasa, coming to Lamu. Then we have the cargo, the freight cargo loaded on the rail, which we are developing, which we are going to call the standard gauge railway from Mombasa, which will go to Uganda, it will go to Rwanda, and that's Southern Sudan. But then along the way, we also have got the road networks, which require also to be considered in terms of the elements of this corridor. And then, to make sure it's effective, each of those elements, from maritime to rail to road to airports, you must make sure that they are all working together. In Mombasa, we were there last week to ensure that, for example, when the ship lands in Mombasa, when we have customers, corporate customers waiting for their cargo, we want to know how long it takes for the ship to berth. We need to know how long it will take for the ship to turn around in terms of making sure the cargo is offloaded. We need to know how long it will take by road from Mombasa to Uganda. So all those elements must be put together to make sure that you have a seamless transport corridor. With that, then you have a proper freight system, which I believe ensures we have a sustainable system, into the future.
There are a number of parties looking to control and possibly reduce the carbon footprint Because maritime trade carries about 80 to 90% of world trade, and although it is far more efficient than air transport or road transport, the fact remains that it still generates a huge amount of CO2. And it is very much post-COP21 on the agenda of all the international associations to do with shipping as to what do we do to begin to monitor, because that's the first thing we have to do, and then begin to control CO2 emissions. As an organisation, we've produced 3 reports in the last 3 years. Once is Global Marine Trends 2030. At the time, we believed that world trade growth could double by 2030, which has huge impact on infrastructure. We now believe, as a result of what's happened since then, that perhaps it'll be slightly less than double, but still a huge increase. Then we produced a report on fuel trends. The maritime industry still burns very heavy, dirty fuel oil, and that will have to change. And that is through lower sulfur fuel and possibly gas in future to reduce our carbon footprint. And finally, and probably most importantly, in the last year, we produced a report on technology trends, because we believe that technology can provide quite a few of the answers to an industry that, to the outsider, looks as being fairly technology enabled, using fairly basic techniques. But shipbuilding is advancing, new materials are being used, and I think there's a huge emphasis to make shipping more efficient and environmentally friendly and play our role in freight sustainability.
The use of safe, customer-centric, and cost-effective fit for purpose and viable transport solutions, while enhancing local community interaction within our networks. So really, it's the 3-band approach: is the social, the economic, and the climate aspects of sustainability. How do we go about it? Very quickly, we learn from our mistakes. We apply lessons learned. We leverage on successes, and we adopt the best practice. Not only on a local and regional level, but of course from what we learn globally. The corridor concept was actually really pioneered in East Africa with the Northern Corridor. And in this seamless movement, you need to have efficient fleet utilization, which leads to cost effectivity. However, again, it involves investment in infrastructure. You've got to have proper terminals in place, infrastructure in terms of equipment, human resources. And of course, you need to try and work both on the rail and road aspect of it. The obstacles and the challenges that we have. So the first one is the heavy investment and hence financial constraints. The other one is a low pool of talent. You know, the transport industry here is actually falsely labeled as a low-skill industry. And therefore, it's difficult to develop and maintain talent within the industry. Numerous non-customs agencies involved in the clearance of goods. Then there's the absence of institutions to sanction those who don't comply. And in fact, you find a lot of mutation happening on NTBs. And then you have cross-cutting issues between the county government, the national governments, and all the other government agencies.
When people are moving, of course they move with their needs. And so we see freight transport as part of that required system to facilitate that movement. Whether we have planned for it or not, people are moving to cities. And today they are moving to cities at a much faster rate than ever before. In regions of the world that are least planned, and therefore it's important that we talk about it. We see that it has continued for many years with the forces of globalization, with the forces of urbanization, with the forces of sometimes unplanned migration. Human beings need services and need goods. So what we see in UN Habitat, in collaboration with our sister agency, especially UNCTAD, is that the issue of freight transport should be seen from a systemic perspective. And therefore, urbanization has to be, I think, State Secretary Eric, you talked about it, has to be seen from within that perspective. Because for quite a long period of time, I think those who are planning the freight transporters, the private sector, maybe they work with central government, and they look at the overall national transportation system without necessarily considering how that is anchored within the urban fabric and the city structure, which is very important for the final distribution of the goods and needs sufficient logistics to enable that. So in UN Habitat, we advise governments to review and establish their national urbanization policies to be enabling to ensure that freight transport is sustainable from all the aspects of social, economic, and environmental. Now, we are at a turning point which is a good advantage within the UN as a system, that we've got the 2030 agenda that have been endorsed by the member states. And we believe that within this 2030 agenda, where we have got all these goals that are integrated, it will be easier, I want to be optimistic, that countries and we as the UN will learn from that which has been done well, spread it, but also uphold policies that will last longer than us in office. We realize that there has to be strong regulation around supporting such planning to enable that to be finally realized and effected.
We need to do like sustainable systems with the environment. So we try to look for electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles. So the role of the government has to support that. So we have to do like a special lanes for the trucks or bays for the parking, and because all of the traffic is affecting the movements of goods, and we need, as Asia mentioned, we need the goods to live every day. Maybe we can live, we can walk to work, wherever, but we cannot live without goods in our days. So the role, to finish, the role of academia is to, foster these systems with the environment. For example, in the port of LA and Long Beach, they only allow like electric vehicles because it's for the environment, it's much cheaper. The government gives like a taxation free for those trucks, so it's like a combination of all things. And to finalize, we are working also with the Inter-American Development Bank, with the World Bank in different countries to assess the congestion of freight, so how congestion affects the supply chain management. So we can see that, for example, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, the congestion increases the cost about 80 to 120%. And also the emissions for congestion, it increases about also like 50 to 60% in different developing cities. So we need to focus on that, and the challenge is that the government and the people understand that this is a reality that we need to focus on.
More than 40% of Africans who do not have access to an all-weather road. You have the highest per capita traffic fatalities in Africa, almost double, or actually more than double what you see in Europe, for instance. You have 18 landlocked countries and a number of other small economies throughout Africa that endure significantly high or higher transportation costs to access global markets. So that's the African reality. Now, our approach at the African Development Bank is very much aligned to these challenges that we face in Africa. And in terms of freight transport, we focus really on three key areas. One is regional connectivity. Ensure that all our countries are connected between themselves and also connected to global markets. That's through regional transport corridors, trade and transport facilitation mechanisms in order to support regional integration, international trade, but also in order to improve and increase the intra-African trade. That's trade between African countries. The second thing we do is focusing on access, making sure that people who live in rural areas are connected with the urban centers to be able to evacuate their produce, have access to socioeconomic opportunities, etc. And then the third thing is really building capacity at the level of executing agencies, ministries, make sure that they tackle issues related to traffic safety and to environment and climate change. In the short term, our focus has been on improving efficiency of the existing systems and increasing the better capacity utilization of the existing system. We believe that if the city is well planned and well connected, then the issue then the issue of congestion and the issue of air pollution will be addressed and minimized, because we spend a lot much more energy transporting, connecting and moving around, especially when we haven't planned well our urbanization, and when we have different services being given at different points. In terms of the core elements of the framework, I think there is a need to have a broad agreement on the key performance outcomes that we are looking at, whether it's energy efficiency or the share of renewables, and different metrics related to efficiency, etc. I think that's extremely important, that there be a broad sort of consensus on that. The second core element, I think, is the need to have a clear monitoring and reporting mechanism. That is, we need to be able to measure, what we want to achieve and be able to report on that regularly. And then finally, there has to be some kind of institutional mechanism or partnership arrangement to drive this whole process. And maybe UNCTAD played that role. But again, as I said earlier, there's already a number of initiatives, for instance, the MDB's working group on sustainable transport, and that also could be leveraged.